You gotta do it every time now.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Mafia Podcast NBA edition. And we are in the middle of our NBA offseason previews. Essentially, what we're doing right now, we're focusing on the non-playoff teams, the teams that didn't get invited back for this season. So today, we're going to be talking about the Chicago Bulls. We're going to be breaking down and giving a recap of their 2019-2020 season. Then we'll go through their roster, upcoming free agents, and then kind of end it on where we see them finishing in the future. So my name is Jordan Jika, aka Dr. Fantasy, and I'm here with my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. If you don't already, before we hop into this, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out thefantasymafia.com and on Facebook. So let's jump right into the Bulls 2019-2020 season recap. They were 22 and 43 in the East. Their head coach is Jim Boylan, who's been there for since 2018 now. Their point leaders were Zach LaVine with 25.5 points. Second, they had Lauri Markkanen at 14.7. Then they had Kobe, not Colby, Kobe White at 13.2 points. Their rebound leaders, Wendell Carter Jr. at 9.4 rebounds, Lauri Markkanen with 6.3. Assists, Thomas Satoransky at 5.4, Zach LaVine at 4.2. Defensively, Chris Dunn led the way with 2 steals. Zach LaVine had 1.5. Thad Young had 1.4. Only guy of note really for blocks was Daniel Gafford, who's one of their big men off the bench, had 1.3 blocks per game. Any notes, any players that impressed you this season for the Bulls, Caveman?
Yeah, the Bulls are a very interesting situation. They got a lot of guys with some talent. You got Levine, Markkanen, who had a very down year from what I was looking at. So I expect him to rebound next year. But then you got Carter, Dunn, White, Gafford that you just mentioned, with the only guy that really had any blocks. Guy that probably impressed me the most would probably be Kobe White, not Colby White, who I say all the time. He's not a cheese. Kobe White. Uh, Looking at it before the season kind of killed off in February, he had a stretch where he dropped 30 in 3 straight games, and overall in the month he averaged 20.1. Uh, obviously he's a kind of a scoring point guard. He's not gonna get you a lot in the way of assists, especially when you're talking, obviously, with their assist leader Satoransky at 5.4. So obviously he's uh, even less than that. But he's a pretty good scorer. He came into his own and was able to take that starting job. Another thing, he fairly durable. I mean, the Chicago Bulls were one of the biggest teams hit by injuries this season. They really all the guys I just mentioned. You didn't really see them on the court together that much this season, between all the injuries. And looking at only Kobe White and Thomas Satoransky were the only 2 guys who appear in every game this year. So a lot of injury thing in there. And I also can't really talk about players from the last season without mentioning Zach LaVine, who we have a jersey coming in for one of our Razzes. We have a Zach LaVine jersey coming in, so keep an eye out for that. But I was kind of surprised looking at his stats. He had a plus minus of minus 3.2 when he was on the court, and the team as a whole was only at minus 3.1. So kind of surprising, but you got a lot of that's attributed to teams could basically key in on Zach LaVine.
Yep.
So that might be a bit misleading, but still found it interesting. He had 20 points in 45 times, 30 points 19 times. So when you're looking at the Bulls this past season, Zach LaVine was pretty much the only guy they could rely on for his consistency from the offensive standpoint, which we're obviously gonna bring up when we get the offseason needs, but they're definitely gonna have to address that from that perspective next season.
Yeah, and I agree. Kobe White, and I remember him being on our streaming list a few times when we were
Mm-hmm.
talking
Yep.
daily fantasy. He had some big games, and the last 2 months of the season, March was shortened, but he averaged over 20 points in both of those games. And being a rookie, I think it would have been really fun to watch his progression throughout the rest of the year. So I'm excited to see how he does next season. He'll have a clean slate and a clean start. One of the things that is kind of underrated about this Bulls team as a whole, and one of the reasons I kind of like them, I mean, not to be a dominant playoff team or anything crazy like that, but actually they were kind of middle of the pack defensively, which might not seem optimistic, but when we're talking about a lot of these non-playoff teams, I mean, I feel like every episode we've talked about how poor they are defensively.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bulls are a little different. They're like right in the middle. I think they were 15th in terms of opponents' points per game. So, I mean, literally like right in the middle. So, it's kind of interesting though, and this kind of segues into their roster recap. When you look at their starting lineup, not overly strong defensively, but when you start looking at their bench, I mean, role players like Denzel Valentine, Otto Porter, Thad Young, Gafford, even Markin and Wendell Carter in their starting lineup, Shaq Harrison. These are guys that aren't prolific scorers, but they're all very solid defensively. Even Sadurinsky, Kobe White and Zach LaVine, who are obviously their top two offensive threats, definitely not strong defenders. They can steal the ball a little bit, but they're not
Yeah.
overly strong defenders overall in terms of actually guarding opposing guards. So it's kind of interesting how their roster is constructed. I kind of like it. I still think they need
Mm-hmm.
another scoring threat in that starting lineup. I think that would help them in the future. But kind of going over their current depth chart, their starting point guard, as we've already mentioned, is Kobe White. They have Thomas Sadurinsky coming in behind him. Shaq Harrison, who kind of plays all over the court, is listed as their third point guard. Chris Dunn, who we'll mention in a moment, isn't currently on their depth chart because he's a free agent, but he plays mostly point guard off the bench for them. Starting shooting guard is Zach LaVine. Behind him, you have Denzel Valentine and Sadurinsky, who plays there as well. Starting shooting forward right now is listed as Shaq Harrison, Otto Porter off the bench, and Denzel Valentine. At power forward, you have Lauri Markkanen, Thad Young, Otto Porter. And then at center, you have Wendell Carter and Daniel Gafford. So, any notes you want to make on their starting lineup here?
Uh, Damn, we're gonna talk about it when we get to the offseason needs, but man, that wing situation's rough.
Yeah.
Man, that's rough. Like, what? So we're gonna talk about that in a second, but yeah, other than like obviously I think going forward, we'll see how this all shakes out, but unfortunately I can see a situation where we're gonna talk about this when we get to the draft. But with it being so point guard heavy in the draft, I can actually see. Actually, I don't want to see it, but I could see them moving Kobe White to the bench next season, depending on how this goes. I don't want to see it, but yeah, definitely interesting to keep an eye on there.
Yep, for sure. So I'll move over to their upcoming free agents. They have three big guys of note. I already mentioned Chris Dunn, Shaq Harrison, Denzel Valentine. I will mention their two-way contracts.
Yes.
They're G League players because they're very important to you.
Yes.
Max Struss and Adam Mokum. You're gonna even make me try to say his name. Adam Makoakoa, something like that. Sounds like cocoa, like some sort of hot chocolate drink that we're talking about here. But we'll call him Adam Coco, and he's a free agent as well. So and we also mentioned Otto Porter has a almost $28.5 million player option. If he doesn't pick that up, then he's the worst businessman on this planet. So, what do you think? You expect them to retain any of these guys? Move on? What do you think?
Okay. So I'll quickly with the two-way players. I feel like you think we spend way too much time talking about these guys, but Contrary to the past couple episodes, guys, you kind of played 10 games and not like 60 minutes. Adam Makoka actually played 112 minutes.
Oh, okay.
The other guy played like 6, but so just say, yeah, obviously with Otto Porter, he'd be a fool not to, and I fully expect him to pick up that contract. Probably much to the Bulls' dismay. I think they would much rather him decline it and they can kind of, just move on. But not going to be the case. Obviously with other big names with Dunn and Valentine, and Shaq Harrison for that matter, who are all restricted. They're all guards, pretty much. So I don't see them retaining all of them. I just, just I don't know if there's enough room. Because if you do that, then you're pretty much set at the guard, and you kind of you don't really leave any room to kind of improve the position because of all the guys you would have there. I think they try to keep Chris Dunn, a little bit more versatility in my opinion. I mean, obviously Shaq Harrison, as you mentioned, played the wing, but you're not going anywhere if Shaquille Harrison's playing playing on the wing for you. I don't want to just not trying to sound like Shaq Harrison's a horrible player or anything. Oh, that's how it's coming across, but let's just
He's a role player.
Yeah, really same with Chris Dunn. I would just prefer Chris Dunn. Valentine's interest. He was hurt a lot last year. Another one of those guys, where you kind of really don't know what Valentine's going to be. So they might keep 2 of them, but I think they're definitely going to try to keep at least one of them. My guess would be Chris Dunn, obviously in addition to Otto Porter, who will still be there.
One more year anyway. Yeah, I think that they should try to retain Chris Dunn. He was, when you look at their metrics, their strongest defender. So, I kind of mentioned, I still think that defense is very underrated in the NBA, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at the standings. All the teams in the playoffs are in the upper half in terms of their defense. So, I mean, it matters to a certain extent as much as the media covers Steph Curry and all these guys that love to shoot the ball. You still need to be able to defend. And even if you have superstars that don't defend, you need to have role players that can make up for that.
You don't need to defend.
Yeah, well, the Rockets, that's a whole other conversation. But, I mean, it kind of depends for Denzel Valentine and Shaq Harris. It depends on what they command in the open market. These are 2 guys that play solid defense, and if they're coming off the bench for you, there's nothing wrong with that. So if these are guys where somebody wants to overpay and give them $10 million a year, I think they'll let them walk. But if these are guys where they can get them for a few years it seems like $5 million a season is about what a role player makes now. If they sign them 2 to 3 years at, $3 to $5 million a year, I think that's reasonable, and they need that kind of defensive depth on their team. So we'll see. They'll have a ton of cap flexibility after Otto Porter's gone next year. They're not really paying too many guys. Zach LaVine makes $19.5 million, which is well worth his production. Thad Young's making $13.5, which seems like a lot, but Thad Young is a great player off the bench. So maybe a little much for him. Tomas Sadorinsky, I was a little surprised, is making $10 million right now. So we'll see what happens with him in the next 2 years. But yeah, let's go into their offseason needs, which we've touched on a little bit. And I'll let you kick it off. I know you're probably going to talk about a wing player a little bit, so I'll let you get into that.
All right. Well, before that, the first thing is they need the right head coach. I don't think they have the answer there. What was it? Jim Boylan's their head coach. Yep. I mean, I think when you're talking about the Bulls and you have guys like LaVine and Markkanen, you need a coach that's going to develop them properly. And I think the Bulls see Zach LaVine as kind of their superstar player, which I like Zach LaVine, but he ain't a number 1 option on a championship team. I think he's more suited as like a it might sound a little bit disrespectful, but he's probably a number 3 option on a championship team. But if they do insist on going this route, they're gonna definitely need the right head coach to kind of develop all these young guys. And then, like you mentioned, I'm gonna bring up the wing help. I mean, their main wings last year were Chandler Hutchinson and Otto Porter. I mean, it's kind of a little bit unfair to them because they weren't really healthy at all last year. Otto Porter, when he played, him and his $26 million, he looked like garbage when he played. Probably a lot to do with rust, probably. But wing help, that's going to be their number 1 position to need. They're going to, especially to try to help the scoring wing, I would say, kind of, you got to take a little bit of pressure off Zach LaVine as the main guy. I like Kobe White, but I don't. That's a lot to ask of a guy to step in and be in his second year and be the main number 2 option on a team. And I already touched on it, but I personally think the Bulls. I mean, it's not going to happen this offseason because of that Otto Porter deal. But going into the following offseason, I think is when they can try to get a true superstar. If you can pair a true superstar with Zach LaVine, then you're talking a team that could, possibly make some noise.
Yeah, and you mentioned the head coach, and I agree with you. I was reading several reports from Chicago beat writers, different articles from fans, and he is very highly disrespected in Chicago, and he's really not known for developing those young players, as you kind of mentioned. So I agree. I mean, they have a decent roster, and I mentioned a solid defense, some young scorers. They should have won more games than they did last year, and that's a reality. So. And one thing that you and I talked before we started recording, but they hired Arturas Karsanovas as their new vice president running basketball operations. He comes over from the Nuggets, and he's actually kind of touted for his international scouting. So he scouted Jokic over with the Nuggets, and he's just known to be really talented in that regard. So that's kind of interesting to me.
I fully expect him. I don't think that Jim Boylan is going to be their coach next season.
Yep, I was just going to say.
I'd be shocked if they kept, because that was a Paxton hire, and we all know how great he was as an executive.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's pretty normal whenever you have a new GM, vice president to come in and go get their guy at head coach. So yeah, I would be very surprised. Oh gosh, they're gonna go back to Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, bring him back.
He's gonna go ruin the Knicks now, so that's his next destination. Well, you can't ruin the Knicks; they're already ruined. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
It's sad to say with it. As bad as Tom Thibodeau is, it's crazy that he might actually improve the Knicks. That's how bad the Knicks are.
That's embarrassing to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, wing's going to be their number 1 position that they need to target. Most likely in the draft, they'll have a top 7 or so pick. A few names that I have that they could go after. I feel like I'm saying Aaron Nesmith's name every episode.
Yep.
Maybe that's my bias, but I mean, once again, he's a strong defender, strong shooter, doesn't need the ball in his hand. Zach LaVine and Kobe White want to score, and Aaron Nesmith could play off the ball. Other guys that we've talked about, Devin Vassell, Isaac Okoro, a guy that I think is interesting, especially with their new vice president there, is Denny Avdija, a foreign player coming in this year. He's a guy, I don't know a ton about him. I've seen some video, watched some YouTube clips on him. It's hard to get a feel for a guy watching that. Obviously, you don't know too much about foreign players. But this is a guy, it's similar to Luka. I remember when Luka got drafted, I'm like, I don't know who this guy is. But, it's a similar situation. He's coming out of Israel this year. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Bulls go after an international player. And he's a strong wing player, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's who they target in the draft.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've seen some mocks that have them, and this is why I was talking about Kobe White earlier. I see some mock drafts having the Bulls taking a point guard,
Mm-hmm.
which I get it. I get if the Bulls aren't going to be exactly sold on Kobe White, but with 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 how much help they need at the wing, and especially with how because overall the wing depth in this draft, and we talked about this several times, especially at the wing, the draft it isn't that deep.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get past the top couple of guys that you mentioned, it really starts to fall off in terms of wing talent in the draft. And you mentioned him, but I think Isaac Okoro makes the most sense for them. I mean, you got I think he might be the most talented wing in this draft, and he would step in and be a game one starter, uh, no doubt. As far as free agency goes, another wing who the Bulls aren't going to be able to get the big names, uh, partly because of Otto Porter's contract.
Yep.
That's ridiculous. But Mo Harkless is an interesting name.
Mm.
He kind of tailed off at the end of last season, before play got suspended. So he might fall into that cheap contract range for the Bulls. And his numbers aren't impressive. He averaged 5.8 points, 3.9 rebounds, an assist, a steal, half a block. But he did shoot 50% from the field and a respectable 34.7% from beyond the arc. And they just need wing depth, and I think, obviously, I wouldn't like Mo Harkless starting on my team. But if when we're just talking wing depth, especially if they decide, which I really hope they don't, but if they do decide to go point guard in the draft, I've been hearing some reports about Halliburton possibly going
Mm-hmm.
to the Bulls, which I don't like because I really like Kobe White and I want to see him try in year two as their guy. But Mo Harkless makes sense, especially if they go point guard in the draft, which they might. But either way, he's kind of a nice veteran that kind of help develop, to help not develop, but help teach those guys, young kids in Chicago, some things.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a nice target as well, and that just adds to their strong defensive presence that they have coming off the bench. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's kind of look forward and see where we think they can finish in the future. I think a lot of this does ride on the head coach, and we kind
Mm-hmm.
of mentioned this briefly, but they should be getting more out of this roster. I kind of like how it's constructed. This is a team that I think should be fighting for the 8 seed. So if they're able to make a nice pick in the draft in terms of filling that wing position, I think that would at least make them competitive for the 8 seed this year. So I think that'll be kind of interesting to monitor. But I would expect them, and right now we've talked, the East is kind of top heavy. Do I see any of these guys that we're talking about right now passing the Heat, the Celtics, the Raptors, the Bucks, 76ers, Nets? Definitely not, but could they pass the Magic? Yeah, absolutely. I think they could. So I think that they'll be in the mix for the 8 seed, but a lot of it rides on who they pick in the draft and who their head coach is going forward. So I think that's kind of where I stand on the Bulls. I think they have a young all-star in Levine. Kobe White, I hope they give him more of a chance because he really started catching on at the end of the season. It's kind of funny that you mentioned him not starting. He only started one game, technically, the entire season. So he was primarily coming off the bench, and maybe that's a role he thrives in. Maybe he's more of a Lou Williams. Lou Williams has made a really long career off of coming off the bench. So
Yeah.
I think that'll be interesting. Kobe White's only 20, though. If I was the Bulls, they're not a team that's winning a championship next year. I would rather give Kobe White a chance and see what he can do. But I agree. I think that's something kind of interesting to monitor next season and going forward.
Yeah, like I said, I think like I said, all next season, I think it depends entirely on who they choose to replace Boylan as coach. I was looking over, I was kind of looking into, who the Bulls could possibly target as their next head coach, and Dave Yeager is an interesting name that I would be interested. He led those Grizzlies team to 3 straight playoff appearances uh, from 2013, 2016. Very impressive resume. He has some experience. I want to see the right coach come in there, because if the right coach comes in there and continues to develop these guys, I can see the Bulls being a playoff team next year. Like, I can see that. Like, it's in there. Like, the talent's there, and there's enough talent on that team to be an ace. Like, that's just, you want to make the playoffs. That's the goal. And it sounds kind of, how impressive is being the eighth seed in the Eastern Conference, but that's the reality of the situation. With how they're concerned, they should have been a playoff team this year. I just think that, the injuries played a part, but I think just Boylan was just a horrible hire, like, as their coach, and I think Yeager is an interesting name. I've been hearing Kenny Atkinson as well. I don't think he really. I don't think the Nets should have got rid of him, to be honest with you. That was kind of interesting.
That was surprising, yeah.
That was kind of an interesting situation, I think. I know they're also talking about if the Knicks don't go. Like, I don't get this at all. I don't know why the hell I'm talking about the Knicks. It's upsetting me. But we're just reading about Kenny Atkinson quick. They're talking about if Tibbs doesn't get the job in New York, that the Knicks want Kenny Atkinson. I don't know why you'd want Thibodeau over Kenny Atkinson to begin with.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. But I think Kenny Atkinson, I think he would be a solid choice for that job as well.
Yeah, a few of the guys that I've seen, they were looking at Ime Okuda. I remember him coming off the bench in the NBA for a few years. So it really seems like they want to go in that international direction. So that'll kind of be interesting to monitor going forward. But I think that's all that we have for the Bulls right now. So I don't really have anything to add. You want to add any final thoughts?
Nope.
All right. So that's all that we have for the Chicago Bulls. Our next episode will be the Charlotte Hornets. So we appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and check out our website at thefantasymafia.com and on Facebook if you don't like us already. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Peace.